With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yoma Daf Yud Dalid. We're going to be starting with the new Mishnah. The Mishnah is going to be speaking about the preparation that the Kohen Gadol undergoes during the 7 days of him being sequestered, during the days of Perisha, in order for the Kohen Gadol to become more proficient in the various acts and the various parts of Avodah that he and only he can do on Yom Kippur, so to say, ensuring that he'll do it indeed properly. We will be learning about the Shita of Rabbi Akiva that holds that if someone had mechatas sprinkled on them, if they were not tamei, if they were tahar, then that sprinkling actually renders he or she tamei. We will also learn about a Shita that holds that if someone touches or carries the ashes of the red heifer, the mechatas, for purposes other than for sprinkling, then that person also becomes tamei on different levels. If a person touches it, only the person becomes tamei. But the garments that they are wearing, they become a rishon. Then the garments, midoraisa, as we learned many times, on a biblical level, kalim do not become a sheni. But if the person carries mechatas for the purposes other than for sprinkling it on someone that's tamei, then he or she and their garments becomes tamei. On Daf Yudal Amud Beis, we're going to be speaking about the Seder of the Avodah every day in the Beis HaMikdash, regarding the Ketoidas and the preparing of the candles for the Menorah. And as we'll speak out in more details, that other than the Rambam, that exclusively is the one that holds that the Menorah was kindled twice every day, once in the evening, right before it got dark at the end of the day, and another time in the morning. And the Rambam understands that the word hatavas haneros also means to kindle, to light the Menorah, other than Shitas Rambam. Everyone else holds no, that the Menorah was only lit at night. That's called the haloas haneros. However, hatavas haneros, the preparing of the candles that were done every morning, was really just to take out the ashes, to take out the burnt wick, to prepare the candles to be kindled later in the evening. But that preparation was done in the morning, and as we will learn, likula alme, we did not prepare all of the 7 candles at once. There was a division between 5 and then 2. However, there is a machloikes tanoim what avodah separated the 5 and the 2, and indeed we will learn about what we say every morning in Karbanos, that Abaya Hava Mesader Seder Hama Aracha Mishma de Gemara. He had a tradition, but Va'aliba da Abba Shaul. So we're going to learn Shitas Abba Shaul as to what avodah separated the 5 and the 2, versus the Chachamim Shita of some other avodah that separated the 5 and the 2, which is really all about whether the avodah of the Hatavas Haneros was done before the burning up of the Ketairas, whether it's first Neros, then Ketairas, or whether it's first Ketairas and then Neros, and God willing, at the end of the class, we will share some insight that the Alter Rebbe gives in Lekutei Torah that will give a deeper understanding of this Machloikes and much more. So let us start at the Mishnah. Daf Yudalid Amud Aleph says the Mishnah, as we spoke out in the intro, that already during the May Perisha, the Kohen Gadol was prepared. He did the Avodah every day for him to become better habituated, for him to get it right, so to say, on Yom Kippur. So the Mishnah says that Kol Shivas Hayomim Hu Zoyrek Asadam. The Kohen Gadol was the one that threw the dam of the Tamid Shal Shachar, of the Tamid Shal Bein Ho'aramayim. And as many Rishonim point out, hold on, if you're speaking about the Kohen Gadol getting ready for Yom Kippur, by him already for a full week doing the Avodah of the Tamid, well, the first step was Shechita. The Mishnah does not mention Shechita, and the Mishnah does not mention the second step of Kabbalah. Really, Shechita is Ksheira B'Zor. Kabbalah is Dafka with a Kohen, so they explain the following, that indeed, on Yom Kippur, the way we would shecht the Karbanos was different than the rest of the year. During the rest of the year, the one who shechted the animal properly. And as we learned together in Chulin, even not for Kachim, L'chatchila, an animal has to have both of its pipes, both the esophagus and the trachea, fully severed, or at least the majority of both severed. Only after the shechita was finalized properly, then did another kohen receive the dam. More than that, when a person is busy doing the shechita, they're not allowed to stop in middle of that act. Because then if there's a complete pause, then if someone later restarts, then the whole shechita is not valid. However, since on Yom Kippur, let's go with those Rishonim that hold that even the Shechita of the Tamid Shel Shachar must be done exclusively by the Kohen Gadol. So he has to do the Shechita, he has to do the Kabbalah. Upa, that's already difficult, the same one. So therefore, the way they shechted on Yom Kippur was that he did not do the entire Shechita. He began doing the Shechita. Another Kohen Hedya took over in order to free up the Kohen Gadol doing the Kabbalah. So Bekitzer, the Shechita and the Kabbalah that was done on Yom Kippur is Dafka not like everyday Shechita and Kabbalah, which was why the Mishnah Dafka speaks about him preparing with doing the Zrika, because this is Taka every day similar. So he sprinkled the dam on the Mizbeach. Then we're going through the Seder. The Kohen Gadol for the entire 7 days of Perisha was Makter the Ketoiris, which is done twice a day. And by the way, the Talmud is also twice a day. So there's a Talmud Shel Shachar, Talmud Shel Bein Arbaim. There's offering half of the manna, which is a measure amount that's brought every day. Half of it in the morning, half of it in the afternoon. And look at the Seder of our Mishnah, Umetiv es Haneiros. He would then, like we explained in the intro, he would prepare in the morning, he would clean out, he would take out the burnt ashes, he would take out the used oil, and he would get the lamp ready for the evening's lighting. Then, Umakriv es Harosh ve'es Haregel. And as we will learn, as we learned in Talmud, that there's a whole seder of who brings up what part. Many kohanim were involved in bringing up the limbs to the top of the ramp. What the Kohen Gadol did, he was not the one bringing it up, but he was the one that would actually burn it on the pyre. He would be makted the emurim. So for him to get ready to do it, during the 7 days, he would stand on the top of the kevish, because the Kohen that would throw it, would throw it from the ramp on top of the pyre. And the first Kohen, the first limbs that were brought up was the Roish and the Regel. That is what was given to the Kohen Gadol. He would then lean on these limbs with both of his hands, which is a smicha, and then he would throw it on the Mizbeach. Now there are some Rishonim that hold that the Mishnah is only mentioning the Roish and the Regel, but he would subsequently stay there to burn up all of the other limbs. And other Rishonim say no, that Roish and Regel is dafke. Once you get used to throwing the Rosh and the Regel, then throwing all of the other limbs is more or less doing the same to other limbs, and that is something that he did not have to do during the 7 days of Perisha, but of course he did all of it on Yom Kippur. And then once we're speaking about the Avodah of the Kohen Gadol, says the Mishnah of Ashar Kol Hayamim, during any other day of the year, the Kohen Gadol always has the right to be the first one doing the Avodah. Even after they made the lotteries, and as we'll learn even today on Amud Beis, how there were at least 4 lotteries every day, which was what determined which Kohen Hedjit will get to do what part of the Avodah. Even after the lottery was made and there was a Zacha B'Goydel, the Kohen Gadol at any time prior to the Avodah can come and say, I'm going to do it. Shekohen Gadol makriv chelik b'roish. And aside of that, those parts of the kachim that were consumed by Kohanim, that were divided by the Kohanim of that Beis Av, here also the Kohen Gadol can always take his portion first, and he can take any amount that he wants first as well. V'noitel chelek b'roish. End of Mishnah. Now the Mishnah is telling you that during the 7 days, the Kohen Gadol is doing the avodah, and as we mentioned, all of the steps that he did every day, right, to be better prepared. We learned on Daf Ches, right, the Braisa, we learned Shitas Rabbi Meir, and let's go with the premise that Stam Mishnah is Rabbi Meir, that every single day, other than Wednesday, other than the 4th day, not Wednesday, other than the 4th day, other than Shabbos, but as a rule, during every day of the 7 days, the ashes of the red heifer, of all of the prior red heifers, were sprinkled on the Kohen Gadol. That's just a chumrah. Maybe he became Tamei b'tumas meis v'chulei, as we learned above. Now we're going to have a problem that according to Rabbi Akiva, if someone is tahor and they have the ashes of the red heifer sprinkled on them, that actually brings tumah upon them. So if you're tumah, you can't do the avodah. So it must be, says the Gemara, that Mantana, Amar Rab Chizda, our entire Mishnah cannot be like Rabbi Akiva. Because to eat Rabbi Akiva, Amar Rabbi Akiva is the one who holds that tahor shenafla olav haza'ah. Shenafla doesn't mean it fell, it means it was sprinkled on him. Then timatu, he becomes tamei. And since, again, the premise is that this sprinkling is done, and even according to Rabbi Yossi, it's done on the 3rd day, it's done on the 7th day, our Mishnah says, Kol Shivas Hayomim. In other words, sprinkling is done, then Hechi Avid Avodah. when he became Tamei, and therefore it must be that our Mishnah does not follow Rabbi Akiva, which is definitely not ideal, because just like Stam Mishnah Rab Meir, right, Rab Meir follows the teachings of his Rebbe, Rabbi Akiva, but it must be that we don't have that shita. Now, where do we have the opinion of Rabbi Akiva? The Tanya. And that's the source, that when it says in Parshas Chukas, V'hiza hatohoir al hatamei, and as the Baraisa will say clearly in a few lines, that the Torah could have said, V'hiza hatohoir olav, would have been clear. We're speaking about someone that's already tamei betumas meis. Why does the Torah repeat, so to say, the words al hatamei? It's extra to teach us that dafka al hatamei, if the mechatas is sprinkled on the one who's tamei, then tar. But if the al hatamei, then it's tamei divrei Rabbi Akiva. So again, our Mishnah cannot be Rabbi Akiva. Now the Chachamim who don't agree with the Shita, they hold that if the ashes are sprinkled on someone that's tahor, they remain tahor. What do they do with the extra words ala tamei? The Chachamim imrim another din that ein hadvarim alala amurim ela bidvarim hamakablim tuma. So there's a gavaldik din that if the waters, now the waters were not sprinkled out of a keli, they would actually take the azoiv, in English it's called the hisap, they would dip it into the keli in which you have some waters of the mechatos. Those waters then would adhere to the tips of the azoif. The kohen would sprinkle it on someone that's tamei, and then the water falling on the tamei is metahirim. Now, what happens if those waters are sprinkled on someone or something that is b'chlal not even susceptible to becoming tamei? If that were to happen, then we consider that work was done with these waters, and therefore the shirayim, if there's any waters left over on the tips of the azoiv, they are disqualified from being used on a person who is tamei. And that's the pshat that v'hiza hatohir al hatamei, that if you did not throw it on something that's even susceptible to becoming tamei, it disqualifies the waters on the tip of the azoif. And if you now have to hit a tahor, you have to completely wipe off those waters, then re-dip it into the waters again, and then you can throw it on the tahor, on the tamei, making him tahor. And what's the meaning of that? What's an example of that? Kedetran. And this Mishnah will teach us another nuance in this halacha. And that, what is that? That when you sprinkle the ashes of the red heifer upon someone, you needed to have kavana to sprinkle it on him. So what happens if neschavan lahazis ala behema? Now, b'chlal behema, a living being, cannot become tamei while it's alive. So not only was there no need, but this is a great example that the waters were intended to be sprinkled upon something, a behema, that's not even susceptible to becoming tamei. That would invalidate the waters. What happened was, v'hiza al ha'adam, it hit a adam. So it did fall on someone that at least could become tamei b'tumas meis. So says the Mishnah, even if that adam was tamei, it was not effective. Because like we mentioned, for it to be effective, the kohen needs to be mechaving to sprinkle it on that adam. Here the kohen had kavanah to sprinkle it on an animal. However, im yesh be'ezoiv, if there is still some water left over on the tips of the hisap, this din that it becomes disqualified because work was done with it won't apply. We only say work was done with it if it was sprinkled on something that's not even susceptible to becoming tamei. So then yishna, then you can sprinkle it again on the adam if this adam is tamei. However, neschavan lahazis ala adam, even if the kavanah was good, but if de facto the waters hit the behemah, so now waters, even though the waters that hit the animal are on the animal, here we're speaking about the remaining waters on the hyssop, it doesn't matter. It was sprinkled in a way that we call it work. So even if im yesh be'ezoiv, even if there's waters left over, no, lo yishna, you can't reuse it again, you have to wipe it off because it became invalidated. That is what we learned from the words al hatamei, and dafka not what Rabbi Akiva holds. If waters were sprinkled al hatahar, then the person remains tahar. So our Mishnah must be the Chachamim. Now, my Talmud Rabbi Akiva, because like we spoke out, Nichlev Rachmana v'hiza hatoir olav, my alatamei shmamina alatamei, only then toir. But if alatoir, then tamei. The Rabbanan disagree. Can't be that. They say hay ledvarim hamakablam tumahu da'aset, must come to teach us the din that we just learned. But avul hacha, but what you can't. It's not possible to agree with Rabbi Akiva. because the Kal V'chomer logic dictates the opposite, which is that im al hatomei, it brings tara, so al hatoir, for sure the Torah should at least remain tar. Takakasha. So where's the seichel according to Rabbi Akiva? And Rabbi Akiva says, well, who says it has to make sense? Fakert. We know that paraduma is the supra-rational law of the Torah. It's beyond understanding. But Rabbi Akiva, indeed, Hainu the Ka'amar Shleima. That is what Shleima Melech said regarding the paraduma, regarding the mechatos, that Amarti Achakma, that I said that I will figure it out, at least with Chachma. But V'hira Choyka Mimeni, it's still very far away from me. Okay, very good. Now says the Gemara, V'Rabbanon, the Rabbanon who hold that if you sprinkle the afar para, the mechatos on a tahor, he or she remain tahorin. So exactly what part of the mitzvah did Shlomo HaMelech not understand? Where do we find this paradox that it brings tahara dafke to someone who's tamei, but it brings tuma to someone who was tahar? Hahu, that choik is both lemazeh to the one who sprinkles and ulamazin olav, the one who sprinkles, the one upon whom the water is being sprinkled. Not like Rabbi Akiva, even if they were tahorin, then they remain tahor. However, what happens if someone touches the mechatos, touching it not for the purpose of sprinkling, even that Rabbanan Armoida, then the toucher becomes tamei. And that is what Shlomo HaMelech said. Here Staka doesn't make sense. If it can bring tahara, how can it be metamei? Now the level of tumah is that the person becomes a rishon, which means all he needs to do is go to the mikvah and wait until that evening. But asks the Gemara, are you telling me umazeh that the one who actually does the sprinkling on someone who's tar remains tar? No, when it says clearly umazeh mehanida yechabes begadav. Not only does he become tamei, but the garments that he is wearing, if he's wearing garments, they become tamei with him, which is even a more chamur dikatuma. Not that the mazeh becomes an av to be metama the begadim as a rishon. No, the one who's doing the hazah, the mazeh becomes a rishon together with his garments. Lechatchila, they both become a rishon. So answers the Gemara that taka, it's a pasuk, but this pasuk is dafke not referring to the mazeh, but it is referring to noigeya. Instead of saying one who touches, the Torah uses the words mazeh. So the question is why? Number one, it says mazeh. Number two, this is a bigger problem, that the same pasuk mentions mazeh and mentions noigeya, so they for sure cannot mean the same thing. And v'oi, the third question, the Torah differentiates that the one who's mazeh, like I mentioned, becomes tamei, and his garments become tamei. Boikivas begadim. The one who's negeya, he becomes tamei or she becomes tamei. It's all mazeh or negeya if it's not needed. So how can the Chachamim disagree with it? So they stand firm. Again, the mazeh, even when not needed, the mazeh will not become tamei. What brings about the tumah? Either noigeya or carrying. That if you touch it, not for the purpose of sprinkling. Or if you carry it not for the purpose of sprinkling, that brings about tumah. However, the difference is that touching it only brings about tumah to you, to the toucher, but not to your garments, even though you wore garments while you touched it. And the one who does the sprinkle and the one who does the carrying, he becomes tamei with his garments. Okay, Velamai Mazeh Noisei. The Klotz Kashev and Nichtav Rachmana Noisei. My Tama, why would Hashem referring to someone who's carrying, and the carrying is that brings about the tumah? Why are we calling it mazeh? That's to teach you a nuance, that there is a minimum amount of water that you need to carry or touch for you to become tamei. If you touched it or carried it, not to the purpose of sprinkling. And what is that? And as we'll see in a moment, that there is a minimum amount of water needed for the hazah, and if someone had access to lesser than that amount, and they were negeya it, or they carried it, they won't become tamei. But the tumah is not coming because of the sprinkling. The tumah will only come if there was touching the waters or carrying the waters. Now, this whole topic of there needs to be a shiur of hazah is really a subject to a machlokes and zevachim. So the Gemara asks, Hanicha l'man da'amar that hazah taka needs shiur, but el l'man da'amar hazah doesn't need a shiur. Ma'ikal l'meimar. Answers the Gemara that that Hazah does not need a shiur, that there isn't a minimum amount needed, but there is a minimum amount needed. Hanamili agaba de gavra. That shita holds that how much water is needed to fall on the tamei, machloikis, and this shita holds no minimum amount. The most smallest amount of water will bring about tahara. But that's only about the water that's falling on the person, aval b'mana, but the water has to come from a keli. Right, you dip the azoiv in a keli that has water in it. There, everyone agrees there has to be a minimum amount of water. And exactly, it's this din that we're saying, that when is the noigeya, when is the noisei going to become tamei, or the noisei tamei and is begadam tamei, only if that amount of water was this shiur. And what is that? The Tanan. We learned the Mishnah in Para, kama yehi bohen. How much water needs to be lokula alma in the keli from which you're going to dip the hisap. V'yia kedei hazam, says the Mishnah, kedei sheyitbal daf yudal adamid beis rashi give oilen v'yazeh. So you have the tips of the stems of the hisap. When you dip it into water, let's understand that if there would be a very small amount of water, that water would, so to say, get absorbed in the tips of the stem. They would be moist, but not moist enough that if you give it a throw, that it's going to actually, it's not going to pass the water on. There has to be such a saturation of water in the cup, such an amount of water, that when you dip the hisaps, it's going to touch the tips of the plant, and it's going to be able to then be flung off it when you sprinkle the water. Okay. Ad Khan, the whole thing is coming back that there's a machlekes Rabbi Akiva and the Chachamim. The Chachamim do not agree with Rabbi Akiva that if a mechatos was sprinkled on a tohar, that the tohar becomes tamei. And our Mishnah can only go according to the Chachamim, like we mentioned, because according to Rabbi Akiva, the Kohen Gadol undergoes sprinkling. Says the Gemara now, second answer, Rabbi Yoma, and I'll tell you, Afilu Tema, our Mishnah follows Rabbi Akiva. The Kohen Gadol will become tamei. Who said, says Abaye, that they sprinkled the mechatos on the Kohen Gadol in the morning? No. First, the Kohen Gadol, as his preparation, as his chinuch, did everything he was going to do today. And then the water was sprinkled at the end of the day before Shkia, which is all you need. Because once you become tamei on a level of addition, go to the mikvah before Shkia. Then when it becomes dark, you're good to go for the next day. The Avad Avodah Kol Yoma. He did Avodah in the day before the sprinkling of the mechatos. And only Ulapanya, only towards evening, Madu Alei, did they sprinkle it on him. And then before before Shkia V'Tavel. Then at night, V'Avid Herev Shemesh HaShemesh Gevaldik. Okay, so as we mentioned, when the Mishnah was undergoing the various steps that the Kohen Gadol did every day during the 7 days of Prisha, so the Seder that the Mishnah mentioned was he brought the Ketaitis, yes, twice a day, but let's focus in the morning. Ketaitis first, and then the Mishnah mentioned the Hatavas Haneros, which again, according to almost all of the Rishonim, doesn't mean to light the lamps of the menorah, but it means that which the Kohen needed to do every morning, which was to clean out the leftovers from the prior night, the ashes, the used oil, etc., and to clean out the lamps and to fill them up, and to put the wicks in to prepare the neros. Ketaitis, the Mishnah mentions first Ketaitis and then Neiros. Says the Gemara, Alma, from our Mishnah we see that Ketaitis Bereshin, only then Neiros. Here we have a problem that in Masechta Talmud, the Mishnah there is speaking about the various daily lotteries, and we will learn also a lot about the lotteries here in Yoma. But over there in Talmud, the Mishnah says like this, that we're going through the Seder Hayom. Now, by the way, there are certain things for which you made a lottery for it, and subsequently, whoever won the lottery for it, and the Kohen standing at his right would get the next schos, and then the next one would get the following schos. So we're not focusing on what they made lotteries, but we are following clearly the Seder Hadvarim. That first, that after a step prior, the one after him was the one that got the schus to clean out the ashes. Here we're speaking about the ashes on top of the inner mizbeach. The inner mizbeach, or the golden mizbeach, was the altar upon which the ketairos was brought morning and evening. And before you began the new day, First thing you did was you would clean out those ashes. Then, umisha zacha b'menoira. Here again, we're speaking about the morning. And b'menoira doesn't mean the haloas haneros, but it means the hatavas haneros. Neros first, and then umisha zacha b'kteiros. So in Talmud, the Seder is menoira and keteiros. And here in Yoma, Daf Yudalid, it's Ketaitis and then Neiros. Answers the Gemara, indeed, it must be a Machloikas Tanoim. But let's have more clarity about this. Amar Rav Huna, Man Tana Tamid, that the entire Masechtas Tamid is really taught by one Tana. It follows the sheet of one Tana. And that is the sheet of Rab Shimon Ish HaMitzpah, who... But our Masechta, like all the other Masechtas, follow the sheet of the Chachamim. So that's a machlokes between this Tana Rab Shimon Ish HaMitzpah and the Chachamim. Rab Shimon Ish HaMitzpah is the one that says first Menoid and then Ketaitis, and our Seder is the opposite. And the Gemara says, no. Don't tell me that Tamid is following the sheet of Rab Shimon Ish HaMitzpah. I know that it's the opposite. How do I know that? Because here we are quoting again another Mishnah from Tamid. And here we're speaking about the Seder of exactly where on the Mizbeach and how on the Mizbeach did they sprinkle the dam of the carbon Tamid. Tamid is in the category of an oila. When it comes to the application of the blood of the oila on the Mizbeach, Kaidim called by an animal oila, the blood is put under the red string. Lamata mechut asikr, the lower half of the Mizbeach. Second of all, it's put in a way that's called Shtayim Shehin Arba, according to the Chachamim. Shtayim Shehin Arba means that the blood needed to end up on all of the sides of the Mizbeach, but it wasn't applied 4 separate times as it was by the Chatos. A side of the Chatos going on top of the altar, ideally on the keren, on the horn, but it was applied on every horn separately. By the oila, like in most other karbanos, there were 2 applications. And when you put an application at a corner, so then the blood spreads on both sides. Now, which corner did they apply the blood first? So let's read the Mishnah in Talmud. It's Baloi, Lekeren, Mizrachis, Tefainus. The first corner that he would reach would be the northern eastern corner. And guys, just to have, let's get this picture clearly in our head, that if your back is towards the lesser holy, and you're facing the more holy, if your back is towards the east, and your face is towards the west, then the right side is north, and the south and the left side is south. We also mentioned just recently, right, 2 daf ago, about the Yisoid, that the base was fully on the northern side, the base was fully on the western side, but there was 1 amma of the Yisoid that went on the east for this. So when you applied the blood first on the eastern northern corner, it was taka above the Yisoid, and you put it on the corner, so some of that went on the east, some of it went on the north. They did that corner first because Kachay Kachem has to be slaughtered dafka in the northern part of the Azara. So the closest place that they were was to the north and eastern corner. But now you already covered 2 sides. What other 2 sides do you need to cover? The west and the south. But to make 1 application to get both, then the Kohen would be walking counterclockwise. He would come to the western southern corner. Here again, the western corner has a Yisoid in its entirety. The southern corner has an Amma. And he would put the blood on that corner. Let's read it again inside. That and when he would come to that location, then yes, Noisin Mizrach Tzefayna. So that's 1 that got 2 directions. Then he walks counterclockwise and he comes to the Maravis Deroimis, to the western southern corner, and Noisten Maravis Deroimi. Atkan the Mishnah in Talmud. Now, here's the challenge. We know that there is a Braisa that elaborates on this Mishnah. The Tani Allah, the Braisa brings a Tana that disagrees. Which Tana disagrees with the Mishnah in Talmud? Rab Shimon Ish HaMitzpah. So even before we learn his Shita, clearly this indicates that Masechta Talmud is not quoting the Rab Shimon Ish HaMitzpah, and the Fakir, it's not Rab Shimon, so the Braisa here brings, you should know, that Rab Shimon disagrees. And he was Mishana B'Talmud. In other words, even he agrees that by every carbon oil, this is exactly the way it was done. Shtayim Shein Arba. The first application is northeast, and the second application is going to be southwest or west-south. Seder. However, Dafke by the Talmud, what was the Seder? He agrees in the first step. The first step was 1 application in the corner that was the closest to the Kohen, because the Avodah is done b'tzafin. Again, we're not going to put it northwest because on the east-south corner there is no Yusoid. So it has to be east-north or northeast. And like we read it inside, the first one, Mizrach is Tzefainas. When he came to that location, Noisin, Mizrach Tzefainas. However, when it came to the next two sides, he separated the Ma'ariv from the Darim. Two other applications. Which one did he come to first? He's going counterclockwise. So if he began northeast, then the next place will be west. Maravis Deroimis was not one application. It was first one separate application only on the west side, Amarava, and then the final application would be on the Raima. A total of 3 applications, which will cover all of the 4 directions. Point is that don't tell me that the author of the Mishnah in Talmud is Rab Shimon Ish Hamitzvah Nisht. So therefore, again, it's a machlekes tanoim, coming back to the question of whether it was the Ketaitis first, and then the Menorah, which is Yoma, or whether it was in the opposite of Talmud, so there has to be Punkt Fakert. Elam Rabbi Yechanan, no. Talmud is following the sheet of the Chachamim. Man Tana Seder Yoma, these nuances in Masechta Yoma consistently only follows the shita of Rab Shimon Ish HaMitzpahu. Okay. Now it fits that the Mishnah and Talmud that said it in, if Rab Shimon argued, the Braisa needed to bring it because Talmud is not Rab Shimon Ish HaMitzpahu. But we are saying that Seder Yoma is following the same shita. Now we have a right and a problem. We have a stira in Masechtas Yoma itself. So we just learned again Daf Yudalid Amud Aleph, and here the Mishnah writes clearly that the Ketaitis is first, the Ketaitis in the morning, and then you have the Hatavas HaMenorah. Second, problem is, V'rami Seder Yuma, because we're going to have a Mishnah not that far from now, in 10 Daf, and a bit, and Daf Chof Hey. And there, again, the Mishnah, we're going to learn the details of the various lotteries that happened every day. Our Mishnah here in Yoma is going to go into the specific, what was the first lottery for, and then the Mishnah continues, Payis Hasheni, the second lottery. Also, we have to explain later how the lottery was made, but the second lottery was to determine Mi Shoichet, who's going to shech the morning Talmud, and then we're going through the order, and Umi Zoyrek, who's going to throw the blood. Next is Mi Medasher Mizbech HaPnimi, who gets the schus of clearing out the ash from the inner altar. Look at the Seder now. The next step is Mi Medashein as HaMenorah. Medashein HaMenorah, clearing the menorahs, the way we are interpreting the words of Hatavas HaMenorah. And then, and look at this, not only Ketaitis right away, Umi Male Varam Lakevish, and between the menorah and the Ketaitis, there's another avodah. What's that other avodah? Who will be the ones bringing up the limbs to the kevish, to the ramp? And we learned this in Talmud, we're going to learn more details. It wasn't one kohen. They divided, like we learned on Amud Aleph, the head and the right hind leg was given to one kohen. Right, the head in the right hand and the right hind leg in the left hand. And there's a whole seder about all of the other kohanim that were needed to bring up the limbs to the altar. But we didn't touch the Ketaitis yet. The Ketaitis wasn't even a hemshech of the second lottery. Payis Hashlishi was the avoid of the Ketaitis. Now, the way the Mishnah here on Daf Chafei speaks about the avoid of the Ketaitis, this is very important, is that the Mishnah uses the words Chadashim L'Ktaitis. They would announce before making the third lottery, only those that are Chadashim, only those that are new to the Ketaitis, meaning only those who never yet in their lifetime were Zoiche in the Geidel of Ketaitis, they should come and join the circle. Because being that Ketaitis, aside of it being an avodah, and any part of the avodah is, wow, how great that we're serving God Almighty, but the Ketaitis also had in it as a skula to become wealthy. And in order to share that skula with as many kohanim possible, the agreement was, if you won the piyus of the Ketaitis once, until all the other kohanim also had one opportunity, don't even go into the lottery. And by the way, here again, the exception is, as we had in the Mishnah, the Kohen Gadol can do it as much as he wants. Umikan, says the Ramah, that Sandik, who's holding a baby by a bris, is the closest thing we have to the avoid of the Ketaitis. And first of all, it brings about Ashirus. And as many have a tradition, that's only if you're both the sitting Sandik and if you're the standing Sandik. Once you divide that up, you take away that koyach. But also the Ramah brings the concept that unless the person who you are honoring is like the Kohen Gadol, is like the Rebbe, then don't give it to the same person twice in that family. Chadashim L'Ktaitis. Bottom line is that the Mishnah in Yoma on Daf Chofei clearly mentions first the menorah and then the ketores. Now we have a problem. In the Shitas, so what is Shitas Chachamim? I'm sorry, what is the Shitas Rab Shimon Ish HaMitzpah? So Amar Abaye, here we start. That when it comes to this avodah of clearing out the menorah, of preparing the lamps, we have a tradition that we don't prepare all 7 in one go. That the Seder was first 5, then 2. What do I mean, then 2? Because there was another avodah that was machalik between the 5 and the 2. And as we'll learn right now, there's a machloikas between Abba Shol and the Chachamim. What was the avodah that separated the 5 and the 2? There was for sure an avodah that separated. Either it is, like we just quoted from Daf Chafei, it was the Evarim, the bringing up the Evarim on the ramp, or it was the Ketores. Now, if the Ketores is that which was mafsik between the 5 and the 2, now we resolve the contradiction. Because in one Mishnah, right, it says, again, Daf Yudalid, it says Ketores and then menorah. So I'll tell you the meaning of it. Our Mishnah is speaking about the Ketores and then the final 2. The final 2 came after the Ketores. The Mishnah in Daf Chafei that mentions first the menorah and then the Ketores, yeah, the Mishnah over there is speaking about the 5 and then the Ketores. Let's read it inside. And Abaye gave that answer. Now, by giving that answer will be problematic. We'll see that in a moment. Amar Abaye and Loikash. Kan, meaning here in Daf Yudalid, we're speaking about the 2 neiros, which is the final, the second part of the Hatavas HaNeiros. And indeed, for that the Mishnah writes on Amad Aleph, the Ketores came first. The Ketores came before the Hatavas Shtei neiros. But Kan, meaning later on Daf Chafei, no. We're speaking about the first go at the preparing and the cleaning out of the menorah, which was first only the 5. 5 came before the ketores. In other words, Abaye is using the ketores to be that avodah that was mafsik between the 5 and the 2. So says the Gemara, are you telling me that this is not Abaye? That the ketores is mafsik lahu? Everyone is moida that there has to be a break between the 5 and the 2. But whether it was the ketores or the bringing up of the evarim like kevesh, let's see what Abaye himself said. For Abaye, we should be saying this every morning before davening. Right by us, the Gita says Abaye have misader seder maracha. Here, let's read the Gemara. Abaye misader maracha. He would teach the seder of the bringing up the carbon to the pyre. And where did he get this teaching from? Mishma the Gemara, from his tradition. But what do we add? What do we add when we daven? We say Mishmei da Abu Shol. Now you'll see right over here, but we don't have those words over here. And in that seder, the dam hatamid is mafsik. The avoid of the tamid is mafsik. So not the bringing up the. I take back what I said. It's not bringing up the evarim. It's throwing the dam. But dafka not the ketores. And the only way Abaye can farem for the stira is by putting the ketores to be in the middle. So the Gemara answers like Hashem. Yes, Abaye have a misader. That's why nach by us in the siddur it says in the name of Abba Shol. In other words, there's really a machloikas. And Abaye Taka learned it. His tradition was like Abba Shol. And that which separated between the 5 and the 2 was not the ketores, according to Abaye, according to Abba Shol. What was mafsik? The dam tamid. But here in Masechtas Yoma, when Abaye is trying to resolve the stira between the 2 Mishnayos, well, our Tanoim are not following Abba Shol's opinion, and they hold that what is mafsik between the 5 and the 2 dafka the ketores, and this resolves it. So Rabbeinu Hakadosh, is maramis. Menorah ketores, ketores menorah. The only solution is that the ketores is in between. There is menorah prior to the ketores, and there is menorah after the ketores. And the Tanya, as we learned in a Braisa, that lo yetiv es haneiros v'achar kach yaktir. Lo yetiv es haneiros means don't do all of the neiros and then bring the ketores. Elo yaktir. In other words, like we explained, some of the neiros, yeah, but not all of them. So you're going to do ketores and then you're going to bring the final 2. V'achar kach yetiv. Clearly, Shitas Chachamim that Abaye is using to take away, to resolve the stira in the Seder in Masechtas Yoma. And now let's learn Shitas Abba Shol. Abba Shol, no. The Hatava was all 7. Now, again, all 7, not all 7 in one go. There was a break. The break was Dam Tamid. But as far as Menorah and Ketores is concerned, all 7 were first done and then V'achar kach maktir. Now, my Talmud Abba Shol, all of this is based on Psukim because it says, and we're quoting here Psukim that we have at the end of Parshas Tetzaveh, Baboiker, Beheitivoi Es Hanerois. What's the next word? Yaktirena, Gavaldik. So in that verse, the Seder is first, Baboiker, Beheitivoi, Hatovas Hanerois, the preparing of the lambs, the cleaning out of the lambs, and then the Ketairis. All of the Nerois, and then the Ketairis. Shitas Abba Shol. Now, we know that there's a break between the 5 and the 2, say the Dam Tamid. However, the Rabbanan interpret the pasuk differently. Maiko Amar Rachmana Daf Tezvav. When it's taka, the Torah speaks about the candles, and then it mentions the word ketaitis. Not because then you burn the ketaitis. No, the Torah is saying the opposite. That while you are baboiker behetiva yasaneiros, at least the last 2. That when you are doing the hatavas haneros, the ketaitis already must be burning. Beidan hatava teimaktir ketaitis. Now, why would you interpret that verse that way? You have to. The iloi teimahacha, then we'll have a real problem when it comes to the Torah recording that which happens in the afternoon, also at the end. This pasuk is again from the end. It's the next pasuk, toward Mamish, almost towards the end of Parshas Tetzaveh, where it says, "Ubaha alois aharoi nasaneris ben harbayim yaktireno." So hachinami, if the pshat will be pashit, that what? First, all of the neros, and only then do you offer the second half of the mana, the second half of the measure of the ketaitis in the afternoon. That for sure cannot be. That hachinami the bereisha madlik neros v'adam makter ketaitis ben harbayim. That will be the pshat, and don't tell me yes. That cannot be. You know why? Because now we're going to the beginning of Tetzaveh. Because when it says in the beginning of the parsha, right, the 2 psukim, we have the Maimer Va'ata Tetzaveh, we are familiar with the psukim. So in the second pasuk, it says Me'erev ad boiker. Me'erev ad boiker is dafka not tamid. So first of all, Me'erev ad boiker, again, we're not following Rambam. We're going according to most opinions that it was only burnt be'erev, and it was meant to burn until the morning. And say Chazal that tein la midasa. How much oil should be put in every lamp? You know what measure? And how much is that? So we already said that in the longest winter night, a half a loig of shemen is enough. With other nuances. And what happens during summer when night is much shorter? It's not that they would put in less oil. Either they would put in the same amount of oil and it would burn into the morning, or like we mentioned, that part of the avodah, we had this in Shkolim, is to figure out how thick the wick should be. So if the night was shorter, you would make the wick thicker. But be that as it may, that's one page. Davar acher, another understanding of Me'erev ad boiker, that Me'erev ad boiker ein lo chavodah sheksheda, that from the Erev until the morning, nothing is allowed to be done. What is the last thing that has to be done be'erev? After which, until the morning, nothing happens? The menorah. Clearly, we know that menorah, here we're not speaking about the hatava, here we're speaking about the lighting. But we're saying that the lighting of the menorah at the afternoon must be the last avodah. Me'erev ad boiker ela bezu. So now we have a problem. So when it says, again at the end of Tetzaveh, uba ha'alois aharoi nesaneres. First, the Torah speaks about the halo'as haneres. We said halo is not hatava. Halo means to light it. Then the Torah says yaktireno. How does that work? The word yaktireno is written after the menorah. Muzman zagen ela maika amar rachmana, that beidon hadlaka. Yeah, the hadlaka is the last. Yaktireno is not that you do the haktorah after the kindling. No, when you do the kindling, there is already the cloud, the smoke, the incense. That be'idan hadlaka te'emakater ketayres. So just like you must interpret that when it comes to the afternoon, so be consistent. Achinami be'idan hatava te'ei miktar ketayres. This is a great. And what about Abba Shol? Abba Shol has to be moided that in the afternoon, the last avodah is the halo'as haneiros. However, Abba Shol Omer, na shani Hassan, dechsiv oisoi, like Rashi writes 8 lines from the top of the Amid, that since the Torah says the words oisoi, kedeperishis, it must mean that what? That be'idon hadlaka, tehei miktar ketayres ka'amar. When it comes to the afternoon, because of the word oisai, that is what we're being medayik, that the last thing has to be the menorah. So it's machriach us to learn the pasuk shaloi kepshutai. However, Abul Shachris continuing in Ashi, right? The pasuk that we had on Yudalad and Beis, the pasuk of the Brayse, Baboiker, Beheitivai Esanerois, then Yaktireno. No, it means Ketoides comes last. Right, then we should say that Abul Shachris beseder mashma ishal mikra, which is the seder of the avodah, beitivoi, all of the candles, and then the ketoides. And just to share the following concept, which is that in the Beis Hamikdash, really there were three fires. You had the fire on the mizbeach hachitzon, on the big maracha, and then you had the fire of the menorah. Then you have the fire of the ketoides. And the difference between them is that in the outer altar, which is the world prior to Birur, we're being mevared in the Mizbeach HaChitzoin. So you have, let's say, fire is the godliness, and you have the fats of the animals, which represent Gashmi, as those parts of the world that are not conforming to the will of Hashem. They are in conflict. And you got to burn it up. And it's a very noisy fire. You can just imagine. The fats are trying to put the fire out, but the fire has to overpower. There's a battle. They're not working together. One has to win over the other. Masha'enkin, the hadlakas haneiros, their olive oil, and dafka olive oil, that's zach, as we'll learn many details of Masechta Menachos. That was such a pure oil that there was no conflict between the oil and the fire. It went in perfect harmony. And that's already the avoid of a tzaddik, where he's not fighting and there's no hiskafya needed. It's all hisapcha. What's the ketoides? Says the Alter Rebbe. Ketoides is that even by hisapcha, you have the fuel, you have the fire. They work together, but they are not one. You have the Yid, which is one with God, but it's the Jew and there's God. Fakert, if you would not have the wick, then the oil will put out the fire. Ketoides, as it was made into a powder, and when you lit it, the fire was the ketoides itself. As we mentioned, that ketoides b'chal in Aramaic, a tes, and a shin, a tes in Aramish is a shin in Lashon HaKodesh. So keter means kesher. Kesher means taka bound together. So ketoides, and that's taka why, and the Alter Rebbe explains that on Yom Kippur, what does the Kohen Gadol bring with him in the Kodesh Kachim? Not the menorah, the ketoides. The Yechida, that we're one with God. The only question is, in the Seder of the Avodah, what comes first and what comes second? And this is very significant. And Ula Yesh Leimer, this is really the Machlekes Rambam and Ramban. If the Iker Avodah of the Beis Hamikdash is Milmata L'mayla, which is the Avodah of Korbanos, then we have to first do that which is of a lower level, then which is on a higher level. Which would be, first do the Menorah, and only after the menorah do you do the ketoides. Milmata l'mayla. Masha'enkein, let's go with the Shitas Ramban, that the Beis Hamikdash, the Iker of the Beis Hamikdash was the place of the Kodesh Kachim, where the Shekhinah comes into the world. We're going from the highest level, which will inspire those who are lower, which will inspire even those that are lower. Then it's Punk Fakert. First comes ketoides, and then comes the menorah. God willing, to be continued.